you have decided to join us and be a part of this and other episodes. This topic today is a critical one in August because August, if you don't know, is when we commemorate the institution of Black August, which is a commemoration for African freedom fighters who have been incarcerated, repressed by the capitalist system. And today's topic, the unknown relationship between Marcus Garvey and J. Edgar Hoover, is really pertinent to this Black August discussion because we would argue that Marcus Garvey was one of the first people who should be recognized by Black August because the state repression against him started over 100 years ago. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and particularly the role that J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime Federal Bureau of Investigation director for 54 years, the role that he played specifically in undermining Marcus Garvey's movement and how he did it, what tactics he went about to do that. So, very important history. Glad that you're here to join us for this hour today. We give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere for their relentless struggle against injustice on all levels. And as we, another important commemoration in August is the Chicano moratorium, which comes up later this month. And we really want to support our indigenous Chicano family. A lot of them want to have these commemorations, but they're dealing with these terrorist, fascist agencies of ICE, and coming out in mass is a challenging thing. So we want to let them know that we're thinking of them in whatever way we can help. We are willing to help all the way up to showing up and doing whatever needs to be done. So we honor them on all levels, at all times. And of course, we honor our African ancestors who are the reason that we're here. I got contacted by this white supremacist, and I told him, you're the way he was talking. I said, well, you're a white supremacist, and he's like, well, I'm not. I'm like, yeah, you are. I said, own it. If you're gonna promote these views, just own it. Don't be a punk. Just come on out and say it. And he's like, okay, I am a white supremacist, but Black culture is violent culture. That's what he said to me. I said, and I started laughing. He's like, I don't know why you think that's funny. I said, because it is funny. You found my phone number and called me, and you're giving me this gibberish. I said, it's the only reason why I don't hang up on you because I need humor in my life. Like that's hilarious. I said, you if you want to talk about cultures, you're standing here raising up a people who the entire history of Europe, we talked about this in our work study meeting earlier today. The entire history of Europe is violent history. Europeans being violent against each other. No one can refute that. It's unprecedented, the level of violence that Europeans inflicted upon each other until they discovered there were other people they could inflict it upon. And that's when the era of colonialism happened. So then this violence, this is what I told this dude, this violence began to be inflicted on Africa and Asia and the Americas in unprecedented realms where millions of people were murdered, killed, displaced, tortured, made hostages. I said, then you fast forward to today, who like you're saying we're violent. We don't manufacture a pop gun. We don't manufacture a water gun. We don't have a single water gun manufacturing entity in African communities anywhere on earth. Who manufactures the weapons of death and destruction? We're not doing that. The indigenous people, they don't even have a water fountain factory no better than we have one. So you can't put that on us. Who are the mass shooters consistently? Who are the people who are committing the acts of like 75% of the pedophile acts? But you're saying we're the violent people. I mean, that hell yeah, I'm laughing at that. That's funny because my head is on straight. So that's what I told him. So, we give honor and respect to our ancestors who I can only imagine if I'm dealing with that just in a conversation in 2025, what they dealt with years ago. Like it's mind-boggling what they've had to deal with. Because there's never been a period in history where people who identify with this power structure have ever acknowledged that they're wrong. There's never been a period. It wasn't like in the 60s they said, yeah, we're wrong. We deserve all these protests. It's never happened. In the 60s, the protests shouldn't have happened. That's what they said. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be any protest. It's the greatest country in the world. They've always said that. This is not a new talking point. This has always been what they said, and it will always be what they said. And the owners, the rulers write history, so we have to write our own. So that's what I was doing with that clown, is just telling him, and he was like, "Well, I don't believe any of that." I'm like, "Well, of course you don't, because you're out of touch with reality, and people out of touch with reality don't ever believe the truth." I said, "But I don't. You called me. I didn't call you. Wouldn't give. If you dropped dead from a heart attack during this conversation, I wouldn't give a damn. So you don't have to believe me, but we could just hang up and you can go on to your miserable life." And then I hung up. So that's why history is so important. That's why we talk about it so much. Because when you know history, you don't have any problem with people like that. The only people that have problem with people like that is because they don't know any better. So we thank you for joining us. And we just give our brief introductions, as we always do, for folks that may not know, that Our Ancestors' Voices is a weekly program, same time, same place, same platforms every week. We have Zoom, we have Facebook, we have whatever those people call Twitter, we have YouTube, we have Instagram, we're on them all, and everybody watches. It's sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. The AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan-African political party with its base in Africa. And our objective is to fight to achieve Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. The title cover page rather of that book, which is displayed on this page. And Our Ancestors' Voices is a program that's hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, AAPRP, and Dr. Shakura Umi, AAPRP. And so to get us started, I'll hand it over to the good doctor.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you, Baba Ajamu. Greetings, everyone. So we are here to talk about Marcus Garvey today. It would be a crime, a federal offense, if you will, if we did not acknowledge that history, herstory, their story has always communicated that Marcus Mosiah Garvey was an African from Jamaica, and alongside the incredible devoted contributions of both one Amy Ashwood Garvey, first partner, and of course, second Amy Jocks Garvey, second partner, with their contributions, the three and many, many other dedicated souls established and built the Universal Negro Improvement Association, also known as the UNIA, in the 1920s, as the largest organization African people have ever assembled anywhere. The UNIA was such a powerful organization, you all, and depending on where you were located, you should check to see if there are still active chapters. Thankfully, here, in Northern California, we were privileged to have some UNIA members come to African Liberation Day earlier this year in May. So very much still an active organization, depending on where you are located. And if this is an organization that you potentially could join, you should do some more research after this seminar today, because you would be very lucky, I would say, to be a part of such a base, foundational, groundbreaking entity that has contributed greatly to the African struggle, more importantly, to helping Africans develop self-determination and responsibility, as well as the acceptance and the humble awakenings to being very proud to be African, among many other things that we could say. I think I can stop there with the UNIA's contributions and legacy. So, of course, the UNIA was founded on the philosophy that until Africa is free, no person of African descent anywhere will ever be free. That's what I loved most about reading Garvey and Garveyism, is written and dictated by Amy Jocks. And I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Baba Ajamu, but dictated from Marcus Garvey's words. Amy documents that Garvey traveled all around the world and noticed the common denominator of us Africans and how we were struggling from a poverty standpoint, from a economic standpoint, from a health standpoint. We had issues keeping food on the table. We had issues maintaining jobs. We had issues feeling valued. We had issues being respected and being mistreated in public perceptions, but also in actual social circumstances. And he noticed whether it was Jamaica, whether it was the US, whether it was other parts of the world, the Caribbean, that the same issue was happening to our people everywhere. And that's when he decided, I really want to study more about what's happening to Africans on the continent because Africa itself is being exploited. Our resources are being stolen and taken. How is this impacting Africans in the diaspora? And there's very much a direct link to how it's impacting us. And he knew that. That's why he made the argument that we should not only start the UNIA, but there are different avenues that we can approach but trying to address that lack of power and the exploitation of power. And so by doing that, he embraced that Africans should have self-determination. And I can't speak to other listening audio platforms because I only have one account with Spotify. But if you are interested in learning more about Marcus Garvey or even his work with the UNIA, there are several audiobooks of his on Spotify. All you have to do is type in his name, and there's at least 5 or 6 books that I came across, some that I have shared with other work study members and listened to. So again, like the information is out there, you all. We just have to increase our political education and become more exposed to it. I will also say that the UNIA had millions of members. And so, because of that, they actually published the quote, Negro World, which was such a cool concept because this newspaper needed to reach our people everywhere. And he knew that with colonization, there was a way for us to have blocked access. And so, what he did was he was able to get together with other Africans who were bilingual and trilingual, and because of that, the Negro World was published in English, it was published in Spanish, and it was published in French and provided in 33 countries as of 1922. And I think that we should just take a moment to just be in awe of that. Because if you want to talk about determination and dedication, you want to talk about barriers, you want to talk about access, you want to talk about ways around barriers, like that is some serious intentionality right there. That is some serious inclusivity right there. That right there. And that's only the beginning to me of how the UNIA has just been astronomical in the work that they have done, because I think they have always understood that in order for Africans to understand their value and their self-worth, we have to first believe that we have the possibility of achieving a free Africa. We have to believe that. And so this is why Garvey continued to do the work along with both partners, Amy Ashwood and Amy Jocks, and many other Africans, because he believed in that. We have been reading Garvey and Garveyism in my work study circle. And even with me reading the book for the second time now, it's just been life-changing all over again because I am so motivated by how much love and passion he has for his African pride. I'm so influenced by the love and passion that he has for African people. And Garvey was definitely, one of the few that really understood we have to love ourselves more than we can hate ourselves. And I think he even, predetermined that saying, even though it would come much, much later, from Kwame Ture, but even he said that. And so I think that just being able to be in the space where you can take in the work that he was doing. Next slide, please. We can even start with the UNIA's contribution when it comes to really working on building the self-determination. And I forgot to mention, one of the key ways that I think Garvey and the UNIA did that is by enhancing the unity and addressing the intentional divisions that Africans were facing. So instead, the UNIA was focused on trying to bring us together, trying to eradicate reasons for us to be separated. And that is why they gave birth to the flag that you see on your screen. And so in case you're driving or you are unable to see the slides at this current time, the flag that Africans everywhere adore and use, you know which one I'm talking about. The one at the very top that has red and then it has a strip of black in the middle, and then it has a strip of green at the bottom. The flag, our flag. This red, black, and green flag was adopted by Africans worldwide as a Pan-African flag today. And you may or may not know that that was actually a birth outcome of the UNIA. Thank you to the UNIA for contributing to this flag, for reminding us what it represents, for reminding us of how this again is a way for us to feel connected and unified. I think he understood that there would be some serious potential divisions between Africans on the continent, Africans in the diaspora. He understood that there would be hesitation, maybe, between Africans on the islands and Africans in other parts of the world. But everybody knows when we see this flag, we know what it represents. Most of us know that the red stands for the blood of our people. Most of us know that the black stands for our pride and our culture and our languages, some that we have lost and we need to regain, and some that we are still holding on to very closely even to this day and embracing as we resist white supremacy, as we resist imperialism, as we resist capitalism, as we resist neocolonialism. We are continuing to fight. We are continuing to be intentional with how we proceed. And of course, the green standing for the land of our people, right? Our beautiful Mother Africa, and how it has responsibilities of contributing 80% of resources around the world, if not more, right? So, like, this idea that this flag was a way for us to see it as a symbol, for us to be reminded that this is bigger than us, and for us to have this idea that it is okay for us to love ourselves. I really think he had intentions of tapping into our mental health and our psychological health, even in the 1920s, when that may not have been as common of a conversation, but so necessary at the same time, right? So the UNIA also developed the Black Cross Nurses Union, which provided day-to-day needs within African communities around the world. And we know how important that can be on multiple levels, whether you were pro-union or whether you were pro-health, addressing the health disparities in the 1920s, addressing the ratio inequities between nurses and patients and whatnot. And so just thinking of the different ways that this organization has been foundational in addressing the community needs and addressing the social needs of our people, right? And then last but not least, African Communities League was another mass independent organization that stemmed from the UNIA. So they weren't just good enough with, helping to support the Black Cross Nurses Union, but they also created a whole nother sub-organization from the UNIA, the African Communities League. And so the effort to start the Black Star Line, of the three ocean liners, it was an alternative to the racist White Star Lining Shipping Company, which is perhaps my favorite part of this slide, because again, like, he understood until Africa is free, we will continue to have these issues. And so Garvey wanted to make a way for Africans to get back home. He understood that the very same problem is that we don't know who we are. We don't know where we come from. We're not interested in embracing who we are. We don't understand that this is bigger than us. Some of us think that our roots are Creole. Some of us think that our roots are French. Some of us think that our roots are from Louisiana, and they are not. They started in Africa. And somehow that just got left out of the story. And he understood that. So this is why he created the Black Star, because he wanted us to be able to travel back and to sail back. And I'm sure Baba Ajama will talk more about what the contradictions of not being able to just take people back home where they're from, like what that looks like. But we also know that Garvey never made it back. He never made it back to Africa. And I think it's important to say that, because even though he didn't have the opportunity to step foot on the continent, again, this pushes the saying of Kwame Nkrumah, where Garvey understood that he was African, because in Nkrumah's words, you are African, not because you were born in Africa, but because Africa was born in you. And I will continue to say that until the day that I die. So if you are joining every week, get used to hearing it constantly and on repeat, because it is necessary, especially in today's time where people are telling people who they are. and where people are believing who they are from other people because they don't know who they are. The dangers of that, the dangers of you not having enough confidence to be able to establish your own identity, and also the privilege of being able to establish your identity because you know that you simply can't listen to someone else. There's so many variables that need to be underlooked with that. So many variables that need to be underlooked with that. But the bottom line is, we have all of these great ancestors who have always tried to teach us that we should be proud of who we are and we should embrace it, we should accept it, and we should step into it. But yet we struggle with not feeling the comfort of it because that would mean pushing against the stream. That would mean going against the current. That would mean stepping outside of the patriotic line that we're supposed to stay inside of. But we ask you this: how successful has your life been staying inside of that line? How safe have you felt staying inside of that line? How embraced and how empowered have you felt staying inside of that line? If you experience any type of poverty, you probably haven't felt great 100%. If you've experienced any type of racism, you probably haven't felt great 100%. If you've experienced any type of misogyny or patriarchy or toxic masculinity, you probably haven't felt great 100% of the time. If you live in an able-bodied world and you are differently abled, life can be very challenging for you because people don't understand how to see the world differently because they are only used to seeing it and the way that they have been normalized to see it. So there are so many different ways that we can look at queerness, for example, and understand that being straight is a privilege within itself. That is a fact beyond measure. Being straight is a privilege within itself. And I challenge you to think about that if you don't agree with me. So again, like, how do we push past those things? Because if you're stepping outside of what the expected norm is, chances are you're doing that because you want a better life for yourself. Chances are you're doing that because you want a better life for your partner, for your family, for your friends, for your animals. Chances are you understand that America has always been broken. It is not based on ethical, moral, and compass, but instead based on exploitation and robbing people, harming people, in some cases murdering to get what they want. And so for us to be able to understand that, we should do nothing but embrace our ancestors. We should do nothing but accept that we should be proud of who we are. We should strive to look for new ways to find more and more out about ourselves that has been left out, that has been omitted from the history books and the herstory books and the theirstory books. And we should continue to find new things about ourselves each and every day. Last weekend, I challenged you all to find the name of the land that you are on. If you are at any part of Canada, and if you were located anywhere between Canada and the very bottom grounds of Chile, then you should know what the name of that indigenous land is, that native land. You should know the name of that. Well, this week we challenge you not only to learn that in case you didn't, but now your work is doubling up. Now we challenge you to learn at least 3 words of your native language, not the colonized language, but your native language that you use in your everyday life. So for me personally, my term for this week is I really need to learn how to say maternal mortality. I need to learn how to say white supremacy, and I need to learn how to say public health. I think those are 3 good terms for me to start with, because those are the things that I use in my daily speeches every single day, right? And so I think that being able to, again, adopt these pieces that we have lost, that's how you build the self-determination that Garvey wanted. Being able to influence others, being able to normalize it, being able to decolonize and to recenter what was lost. That is going to establish us to be able to have faith and pride and to feel proud of who we are and to address the shame that we might feel, to address the disconnectedness or the dehumanization that we feel. The only way for us to address that is to go against what we've been taught and to re-embrace the things that we have lost. And that can be scary because if you don't know what you lost, then how do you know what to look for? But I guarantee you this, the ancestors will not leave you. They've always been with you. We just haven't been listening. So we need to do a better job of that, because if that were really the case, Marcus Garvey wouldn't have had all the success that he had. The UNIA wouldn't even be an organization that we would know of if we hadn't had the ancestors to keep pushing this information towards us. But they can only do so much. It's up to us to research it and to pick it up and to build it, to pick it up and to go with it, to pick it up and to duplicate it, to start another organization, to join the UNIA. they are counting on us to keep that going. So, with that, I will yield. We need to join an organization that is working for justice. And we encourage you to research the UNIA in your local area, as well as learning 3 new words in your native language, not colonized, but your native language of your people. Ashe.
Ashe, obrigada, asante sana, midasi. Thank you very much. And before leaving this slide, I just want to point out one thing that was at the bottom here. Shakur talked about the UNIA starting the Black Star Line shipping line, where they purchased 3 ocean liners. And the point of that was not only just for travel, but to allow African people to potentially engage in international trade using those 3 ships as a conduit, because that's how trade happens, right? Goods are shipped from the Eastern world to the Western world, vice versa. And so that was Garvey's vision. But the reason why he named it the Black Star Line was because the largest shipping line at that time was called the White Star Line, and it was a segregated shipping line. And even if you haven't heard of the White Star Line, its most famous ship was the Titanic. And that is the reason why, well, 2 reasons. That's the reason why the movie is segregated, because we weren't allowed on the ship. And that's the reason why I never seen the movie, because why would I want to watch a movie about a ship where we weren't even allowed to be on the damn ship? No wonder it sank. So this is why he named it the Black Star Line. I think that's just important history, right, for us to know. And then we should get into talking about who was John Edgar Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, because that's a central part of what we're going to talk about as we dissect the topic for today. And it's just important to note that J. Edgar Hoover was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 54 years, right? And he started that role in 1919, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you fast forward all the way up to the 50s and 60s, Hoover was the architect behind the FBI's infamous counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO. And COINTELPRO was the program that actually started in the 50s, where, if you know anything about the history of this country, is the Cold War was happening, the US and the Soviet Union, and anti-communism was rampant. If you think it's bad now, it was rampant in the 50s and 60s. In fact, if someone just accused you of having pro-socialist sympathies, you would lose your job. You would be harassed. You could even be arrested and incarcerated. That was the atmosphere in this so-called democratic country. And so Hoover, being a staunch anti-communist, of course, um, began to develop programs designed to spy on the Communist Party USA, on the Socialist Workers' Party, and other so-called white left socialist organizations in the 1950s. But as the civil rights movement picked up steam, that process began to move out in front of the work that these white left organizations were doing. And that work, the civil rights movement work, began to be seen by the FBI and these other government agencies as much more dangerous to the interests of U.S. capitalism than, the white left organizations even that were socialists. So they changed their focus towards the African liberation movement, particularly, and there was rampant work done to sabotage the civil rights movement. You should know by now that Hoover's people developed a dossier on Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the point of that was that they allegedly had evidence of him having sex with women in hotel rooms amongst his travels to do movement work. And what they wanted to do was release that file to several sources in an effort to discredit Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. This was all J. Edgar Hoover's initiative. And they sent the file to Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, in the hopes that she would turn against King and, discredit him that way. But to her credit, and I have so much respect for Coretta Scott King, because she never said a single word about that file. And we know from several credible documented sources that she received it, that she listened to the tape, she knew what it was about, but she understood that they wanted to use her as a pawn against not even just her husband, but the movement as a whole. And she had the understanding and would not allow herself to be used to manipulate our movement for justice. And for that reason, I have respect. You know, people say, well, Coretta Scott King was petty bourgeoisie. I understand that, but I respect her because a lot of you criticizing her, you would have immediately fell right into their trap and did the work that they wanted you to do. So there was that. And then when the movement turned more militant, in the Black Power phase of the late 60s, that's when COINTELPRO ratcheted up and they created the actual program of sabotage, where between 1967 and 1971, the FBI initiated almost 300 actions against the African liberation movement. And about 80% of those actions were against the Black Panther Party. And by actions, we mean breaking into people's places, planting false evidence, sending letters to people, turning them against one another, which led to shootouts and other types of unfortunate trauma, and arresting people and incarcerating them on trumped up charges and even murder in the case of many uh, leaders in the movement, like, of course, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark come to mind, of course, but there were many others. And their efforts continued against the American Indian movement in the 70s, setting up people like Anime Picta Akwash to be assassinated, which happened, persecuting Asada Shakur, incarcerating Leonard Peltier on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1975, and even continuing these supposedly COINTELPRO stopped in 1974 officially, but COINTELPRO actions happened during the George Floyd protests in the 2020, where undercover FBI agents were sent into the Denver, Colorado Black Lives Matter movement to wreak havoc. So this is still a thing, and J. Edgar Hoover was the architect of this. But what led him to that level of sabotage and terrorism is in 1919, at only 24 years old, he was drafted to become the director of the newly formed Justice Department. That's what they called it at that time. The new wing of the federal government's effort to create a domestic and international intelligence agency, right? So you have to understand that the Justice Department would eventually become the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. And in 1948, the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, was created. But before 1948, the FBI, or before that, the Justice Department, that was the domestic and the international intelligence agency in this country. And once the CIA was created, then the FBI sole for purpose was supposedly to focus on domestic terrorism and sabotage, right? And so this is what they did. And then meanwhile, Hoover was the FBI director until 1971, from 1919 until 1971. And the only reason why he stepped down in 1971, because what Hoover would do for every US president that was elected is he would form a dossier. You know, if you take someone like John F. Kennedy, for example, you know, we all know John F. Kennedy had tons of affairs before he was president and while he was president. Marilyn Monroe was one of them. Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy were with Marilyn Monroe. And I'm not saying anything to disparage Marilyn Monroe. I think she had more, if you study her history, she had more integrity in her fingernail than any of those men. She was the one who, the reason why she had so much depression is that she wanted to have more respect for herself in her career, and she stood up against the Hollywood industry to do that. And she used to, it's not commonly known, but several years ago, her personal photographer passed away. And once his pictures were discovered, it was confirmed that Marilyn Monroe had a taste for African men. And she spent a lot of time in Watts in Los Angeles, frequenting the nightclubs there, seeking out somebody to spend time with. And she would take pictures there. And it was in one of those clubs in Watts in the 1940s or 50s, whenever it was, that she heard Ella Fitzgerald singing, and she was so mesmerized by Ella Fitzgerald's voice that she wanted to bring Ella Fitzgerald into downtown Los Angeles to perform. But of course, you know, those venues were segregated. They were racially segregated. And one of them, one of the main venues at that time in LA in the 50s, she told them, if Ella Fitzgerald cannot sing here, I can't perform here. And so they relented and they let Ella Fitzgerald perform there. And this really, Ella Fitzgerald credited this with launching not only her career, but the careers of many African people. So we don't have a problem with Marilyn Monroe, but I'm just making the point that the Kennedy brothers were hoes and they were out there sleeping with whoever they could sleep with. And J. Edgar Hoover knew this. So he created a dossier of that. And this was the case with every US president. So whenever they would become president, he would make sure they understood if you mess with me, I'm going to end you. And so they let him alone and they let him do whatever he wanted to do, including this illegal, immoral, and criminal COINTELPRO program. But what happened is in 19 by the time Nixon was president in 1968, and then in 1971, J. Edgar Hoover was legally too old to be the director of the FBI. And the Nixon administration used that to force him to retire. Otherwise, he would have continued to retire. Unfortunately, that old uh, bastard died 3 years later, J. Edgar Hoover. The old bastard Nixon died many years later in 1995. But J. Edgar Hoover died in 1974. Otherwise, he would have never stepped down from the FBI. And this is, you know, his role in using terror and sabotage to dismantle people who were not breaking any laws. I mean, it extended all the way to the US presidents. So this is who he was. I don't know why they went backwards, but this is who he was. And if we, we should talk about what Hoover did in relationship to Marcus Garvey. So mention Hoover's first major case in the Justice Department in 1919 was to figure out ways to undermine the Garvey movement. That movement, as Shakur mentioned, was growing in strength. Had the Negro World published in 3 languages in 33 countries. By the early 20s, had purchased the 3 ships and was attracting millions of African people to its message of one God, one aim, one destiny, and that we are all African people. As Garvey said, the Germany belongs to the Germans, Italy belongs to the Italians, France belongs to the French, but Africa belongs to whoever goes there, and that's not right. Africa should belong to the Africans. And he was saying this 100 years ago, and his entire vision and program was focused around doing this, right? So initially, J. Edgar Hoover's work in the Justice Department to sabotage Garvey's work was to focus in on their efforts to launch the Black Star Line. Now, Garvey didn't have any experience with ships or understanding the shipping industry. He just knew that that was something we needed to do. So he hired people who he thought were reliable and committed to the movement. They weren't. They were primarily committed to using the movement to make money. And, this is why we always talk about political education, because the UNIA didn't have an organized political education program. You just said you were dedicated and you joined and you were entrusted with great responsibility. And oftentimes people had other agendas other than helping advance the African liberation struggle. They didn't have the same agenda as Marcus Garvey and Amy Ashwood Garvey and Amy Jock Garvey and some of the sincere organizers. So these people that were hired to research and buy these ships, they instead were focused on making deals that would profit them with the ship makers and purchase 3 clunkety pieces of metal. None of the 3 ships ever sailed. One of them got a couple of miles from the dock before it had to return, but the other 2 never even did that. And so that was a complete disaster. But a lot of that was facilitated by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover influencing the relationship of shipping companies that would even talk to Marcus Garvey, right? So that the seeds were sown for that sabotage to happen, right? And so that's how that happened. And then by 1922, um, Garvey then announced that the UNIA had established a relationship with Liberian President Charles King in West Africa. And the point of this relationship was, even to this day, Liberia has the world's largest supply of rubber plantations. And there was this constant push to get into Liberia to exploit this rubber, because rubber, of course, is used to make everything from tires to sneakers to, if you look around you, it wouldn't take you 5 seconds to find something that has rubber in it. And so this was the big push was to get to this rubber, and Liberia had a large percentage of it. Even today, Liberia, most times of the year, provides rubber that produces 60% of the rubber products used in this country today, 2025. So this relationship with Charles King in Liberia was designed to take the production of rubber away from the capitalist system and put it in the hands of Pan-African organization, Africans in America and Africans in Liberia. And what Garvey had promised King is that we have college educated engineers. We will send them to Liberia to work in these rubber plantations. And in return, we will agree that the rubber that's produced will be used to advance the conditions of African people all over the world. This is exactly correct, you all. This is exactly what we should be doing. 100 years ago, it was being done, right? But the forces of capitalism would never sit by and allow that to happen. The capitalism couldn't let African people eliminate capitalism's control over rubber production. So Hoover's main directive was to sabotage the relationship between the UNIA and Liberia. And the way he did that is at the time, Liberia had a problem with France. France was making every effort to invade Liberia, one of the many entities, but France had the best resources to pull it off in order to exploit this rubber industry and develop it in Liberia in a way that would advance France's interests. You know, France has always been about exploiting Africa to advance its interests. It still does that to this day. That's why there's uprisings in the Sahel region of Africa, and then why Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso kicking France the hell out of the Sahel region, as they should. All the other former French colonies in Africa, Senegal and Guinea and Cameroons and Benin, they should be the same thing. You need to kick France the hell out. And then while we're doing that, kick Britain out and kick Germany out and kick Belgium out and all the goddamn Portugal, all the damn colonizers out of Africa, and the people trained by them, kick them out too, because that's mostly who's there now, the people who operate under the system that those colonizers put in place, right? So just like here, like so many of us, so many Africans and indigenous people, we just train neo-colonizers for the colonists. Everything that comes out of our mouths, everything we do is in the interest of the colonizer. We don't even know how to do anything. I saw a Negro on social media this morning who was talking about black culture is criminal culture, the same thing that the white man who called me last week was saying. And if I could talk to that Negro, I would tell him, I just talked to a white man that said, are you his puppet or something? Like you saying the word for word, exactly what he said. Like the same talking points. Is he your master? Is he paying your bills for you? Is he rubbing your back or something? What the hell is the problem? But we've always had this, you know. So this is what happened: is that Hoover went to work sabotaging the UNIA's relationship with King, and the way they did that is Hoover told King, "We will negotiate." Because again, you got to remember, at that time, Hoover was international intelligence for the U.S. Through the then Justice Department, which was, you know, eventually the FBI. That was international intelligence. There was no CIA yet. So what Hoover did is explain to Charles King in Liberia that I will get France to not stop its efforts to invade Liberia if you stop with this business arrangement with the Garvey movement. And of course, King and Liberia, you know, they're neo-colonial anyway, but they didn't have any other type of strategy to address the situation, so they agreed to it. And they cut off communications with the Garvey movement, and there were no African engineers that were sent to Liberia to develop the rubber plantation. And the other part of the deal was that Liberia agreed to allow Firestone Rubber to come into Liberia and take over rubber production on all the mass land where rubber plants existed. And so Liberia did that. And in 1924, Liberia signed a 100-year agreement with Firestone for Firestone to maintain rubber production in Liberia. And last year was the 100-year mark of that. And the neo-colonialists in Liberia signed another 100-year lease with Firestone to do that. So Firestone, there's a picture on the screen. It's Firestone in Liberia, and they're producing tires. But I have to remind you that in Kwame Nkrumah's government in Ghana, under its socialist construction from 1960 until 1966, when Nkrumah's government was overthrown, Nkrumah's government produced tires in their socialist government system, and they outperformed Firestone in Liberia producing tires. Um, Metric for metric, they outperformed them. And why, you ask? Because if you ask why, it's because you don't understand socialism. In socialism, the workers are respected and treated fairly and paid respectfully and respected for the contributions they make. So that's going to create an environment where people want to do the work and they see that their work is a part of a larger vision to improve society, because socialism has that kind of vision. By working in this tire factory, you're contributing to developing our socialist system, which will allow us to have more resources to improve our country and improve the conditions for everybody that lives here. So people are morally incented and they are inspired to work under that kind of example. Whereas in capitalist Firestone in Liberia, the workers are exploited, they're cheated, they're treated terribly. It's all about production. To hell, if the worker dies on the job, you just throw his body aside and you put somebody else there to keep working. So nobody is dedicated to working, and people sabotage the work, and they do that. I mean, I work where I work. I work as a manager, and I live by socialist principles. And part of that is I really try to respect the people who report to me. I don't undermine them. I don't talk about them behind their back. I don't sabotage them. I try to support them as best I can and encourage them and believe in them, right? And the result of that is that very rarely are people, we have the lowest sick rate in the entire organization. People don't call in sick. They want to, they're inspired to come and do the work. There's data about this, not just me. There's labor data about this, that this is what happens. So you can't compare capitalist production to socialist production. But the FBI understood that they had to, Hoover and them, they had to sabotage the uh, efforts to build cooperative economics between the Garvey movement and Liberia. And that's what happened. And the other element of that is France, of course, now unable to invade Liberia, changed its focus to Vietnam, which also has a large uh, reserve of rubber. And France got into a war with Vietnam and was unable to get out. And guess who went in to help bail France out of Vietnam under the guise of stopping communism? The United Snakes of America. So this is just important history for you all to understand. And a lot of it, again, is connected to the Garvey movement. And the legacy of all of this is by the late 20s, the FBI had arrested Marcus Garvey in 1927. Again, I mentioned that Garvey had hired people who their intentions were not to build up the African liberation movement. They were to make money for themselves. And so he had two of these Negroes working within the UNIA who were using mail to defraud people to send money in, which is illegal. It's always been illegal to use mail to defraud people. And what J. Edgar Hoover did was accused Garvey of masterminding that mail scheme. There was no evidence, but you don't, in this country and around this world, you don't have to have evidence to convict African people of crimes. You just have to have a desire to sabotage our people, and people get convicted. This is like this, oh, African people commit majority of crime. That's a goddamn lie. What the only thing that we do is get convicted the majority of the time. And what these people are doing is they're translating convictions to guilt. And most of you don't study any of this, so you just accept it at face value. But there's absolutely no evidence that we commit more crimes. In fact, the evidence illustrates that populations commit crime consummate to their percentage of the population. So at best, the best metrics indicate that African people commit about 15% of the crime in this country, and we represent about 13% of the population. Those statistics are credible, but you have to do the work to find them. You're not going to hear about that on MSNBC or CIA network. So Garvey was accused of this crime, which he didn't commit. and he was arrested, and he was, of course, not a citizen. He was from Jamaica, so he was deported to Britain, where he lived out his life. And unfortunately, he died poor and I'm sure very depressed in 1940 in Britain. But this was all the work of J. Edgar Hoover, and at that time, the FBI. But we can't let that be the definition of the Garvey movement, because our victories are still here today. And despite the FBI's continued attempts, even today, to sabotage Garvey and W.E. Du Bois's legacy, they want to pit. The FBI is the one that pitted Garvey against Du Bois. And many of you fall right into that. Well, Du Bois was petty bourgeoisie. Garvey was the one that was for the people. They were both for the people. And anybody that says otherwise doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Send them to me, and I'll help them fix their problem. Like Kwame Ture said, if you're sick, you take an aspirin. How come if you're dumb, you don't read a book? This is what we need to get to. So this is what the FBI still promotes this. They still promote this thing. And this is the reason why Kwame Nkrumah, when he convened the Fifth Pan-African Congress, the historic Fifth Pan-African Congress in 1945 in Manchester, England, to squash that reactionary propaganda, Kwame Nkrumah invited Amy Jock Garvey, Marcus Garvey's widow, who's on the top right picture there, to be a co-convener of Fifth Pan-African Congress. And of course, as I mentioned, Garvey had passed away 5 years before that. So Amy Jock Garvey was invited, and W.B. Du Bois was invited to be a co-convener. So the three conveners of the Fifth Pan-African Congress in 1945 were Kwame Nkrumah, Amy Jock Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, Amy Jock Garvey from Jamaica, and W.B. Du Bois from the U.S. And this was, without question, an unprecedented symbolic gesture of unity and Pan-African unity. And here we are, 2025, and coons out here today who don't know any of that history are still running around talking about Garvey against Du Bois. You're doing the FBI's work for them. That's an absolute fact. But the UNIA, as Shakur mentioned, they continue to do the work. And they continued from that time up until the present. And the UNIA was, I wouldn't be here. Pan Africanists today wouldn't be here without the UNIA. They paved the road for us. And they recruited a number of people. The people in the Nation of Islam like to say Elijah Muhammad, the longtime leader of the Nation of Islam, was not a member of the Garvey movement before the Nation of Islam was created, but we know better. We've done the research. There's clear evidence that Elijah Muhammad participated in the Garvey organization in multiple cities, including Detroit, Michigan. That's clearly documented. And we know that even though the nation, all bless their hearts, but they want to constantly make the argument that Malcolm X was the complete creation of Elijah Muhammad and nothing else. We know that Earl Little, the two wonderful folks pictured in the picture on the bottom left, Louise Little and Earl Little, the parents of Malcolm X, a Pan African marriage, Louise Little being from the Caribbean, from Grenada, and Earl Little being married, and Malcolm's parents instilled in Malcolm Pan-African values. So it's not a surprise that Malcolm emerged as a revolutionary Pan-Africanist. Those seeds were planted into him when he was a little boy. And this is the credit of the UNIA and Marcus Garvey. So when people come to me and they criticize Marcus Garvey, I tell them, well, Marcus Garvey produced the Littles. The Littles produced Malcolm X. Malcolm X produced me. So why the hell would I listen to you criticizing Marcus Garvey? You got to be out of your damn mind. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And then finally, as Shakur mentioned, the Black Star, what Marcus Garvey used to develop the Black Star shipping line. Kwame Nkrumah said that Marcus Garvey was a primary influence on him. And so when he helped bring Ghana to independence in 1957, the flag on the screen became Ghana's flag. And the Black Star, again, red for the blood, black for the people, green for the land, Africa, and then they inserted yellow for the gold that they stole. And so this is actually the Pan-African flag, those four colors. But the Black Star was put in there to give respect to the Garvey movement. And there are many flags in Africa today, including this flag, that have a Black Star in them in respect for Marcus Garvey. When Talib Kweli and Mos Def did the Black Star album, that's what they're playing tribute to, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So Garvey is still in our consciousness and is still an ancestor, along with Amy Ashwood and Amy Jock. And we love and respect them and appreciate their contributions, and only hope that we can make a contribution equal to what they have given to us. And so we thank you for joining us. We want to invite you back next week. Again, we mentioned this is Black August, and we're going to have a program next week. The Marin County Shootout is what really helped give rise to the concept of Black August. So we're going to talk about the Marin County Shootout during next week's program. For join us for that, the red and white QR code in the upper left has, if you scan it, AAPRP programs. This one, Our Ancestors' Voices, and other ones within the AAPRP that are broadcast out here. So you can find out about more. You can go to the Forward Ever shop through that QR code, and you can make a purchase for hoodies, t-shirts, clothes that help us do our work in Africa. So please do that. Please do that. And then take a picture of yourself wearing the clothes you purchased and post it so people can know. Help us do the work. We appreciate that. Hoodcommunist.org, Revolutionary Pan-African blog. Um, Wonderful blog. Check it out. You can find it through that QR code. I have articles that they've recently posted and other wonderful writers. So check that out. And then for those of you in Sacramento and the surrounding area, we have a program tomorrow night in person, Black August and Marcus Garvey Day, because today is the born day of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. That's why we did the program today. I forgot to mention that. But the program tomorrow is at the Shakur Center, 3230 Broadway, Sacramento, from 6 to 8 p.m. So we want to ask you to come out. It'll be worth your while. If you're interested in education, you should come out and check that out. And then every Thursday, we want to remind you we have community self-defense at 2775 Cottage Way, number 15. For those of you here in Sacramento, we got folks lined up. Shakura participates virtually. We're not offering a virtual, we're not going to be offering that because it's just too much work when we're trying to, engage in the exercises and the self-defense techniques. But if you're local, please come out and check it out. Or if you don't come out, let people know who are interested in building community self-defense. We invite you to join the AAPRP. Go to www.aaprp-intl.org, and you can watch a video and learn more about the AAPRP and join, as you should. And the QR code in the bottom right, the black and white one, is for our work in the Sahel region in Africa through Burkina Books, through Niger Books. So become a monthly sponsor, contribute what you can, 5, 10, 15, 50, $100 a month, and do that. It's greatly appreciated and needed to bring political education on the ground throughout the Sahel, leading towards the development of revolutionary Pan-African work. And finally, my book at the upper right-hand corner, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Unfortunately, it can only be bought one place through Amazon, but it's only $8 US, and it's a great book in terms of how to organize step by step, block by block in your community. And 100% of the proceeds are utilized for the anti-fascist work that we do here in the Sacramento area. So we strongly encourage you to buy the book, start book clubs, get it out there. I bought up a bunch of materials that I use in the self-defense classes, pads and stuff. And so I really, whatever help that you can give by buying a book, I'm not even asking you to give me anything. I'm giving you you're getting way more in return than $8 when you buy this book. It's a great organizing book, and people are reading it all over the world. So please do that. And we thank you for joining us today. Forward Ever, come out to our programs if you're local. If you're not local, tell people who are local here to come out. Forward Ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your day.